You can start the clock, Mr. Force. You start the clock. The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Barnabas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm going to borrow a line from my good brother and friend and colleague from South Beach, and to say that I don't intend to be long. I intend to be very brief.
Be too long. Don't go long.
Won't be long. Well, the bishop is with me on taking VAT off of breadbasket items. Yeah, that's fine. I actually agree with that. Mr. Deputy, it is a privilege for me to rise again. I'm just grateful to Almighty God for allowing me to see another day above ground. Grateful to be a citizen of what I continue to believe is the greatest nation on earth. Not the greatest little nation, but the greatest nation on earth. And remain just grateful to the constituents of St. Barnabas for their constant support and giving me the honor to serve them for now a consecutive term. Mr. Deputy, this consumer protection bill is a very important bill. Mr. Deputy, as a number of my colleagues will have stated so far for the day. And I think that it is important. About 10 years ago, I was enrolled in the University of London's external law program and had a lot of discussions with a lot of legal minds and others about the application of law and all of the things fundamental things that you learn in that first year, if you will, of any law study. And I remember a conversation, and there's variations of what I'm about to say. But what was said to me was that a law is only as good as your ability to enforce it. And the only reason I've mentioned that up front, Mr. Deputy, is because while the bill is a very good bill, a very important bill for the Bahamian people, I would hope, as I'm sure all of us hope, the parts of the bill in terms of enforcing the law, the investigative part of the bill, the enforcement part of the bill, as with many other bills that come into this place, the enforcement aspect of it is so important. And I think that one of the things we have to do a better job of is, except for the initial rollout of these pieces of legislation, to make, in this case, Bahamian consumers aware of their rights. I'm sure, how many times have we been in conversations, Mr. Deputy, where frankly, if you didn't go to a lawyer, who would probably tell you, hey, that violates your right as a consumer, you probably would not know. And that's okay too, and that's why you have attorneys. But just making, particularly these bills that protects consumers, because even on our journey to diversify our economy, we are a consumption society. We are a consumption society, and because we are a consumption society, it is so important that as commerce goes throughout the country and we engage in commerce in the country, that the Bahamian people, the regular man on the street, so to speak, is able to appreciate what his rights, what his or her rights would be as a consumer. Vitally important. And a lot of times, Mr. Deputy, departments, ministries, like anything connected to the protection of the consumers, it is something, frankly, that doesn't get necessarily the diligence and the focus that it ought to in governments as much, as adequately, I feel, as it should. But, Mr. Deputy, this bill, I believe, is vitally, vitally important. And even as we have this discussion about this consumer protection bill, the larger environment for Bahamian consumers is something that we really need to take a look at, Mr. Deputy. And the truth is, too, one of the biggest providers of services, for example, as we know, is the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, not the PLP, the government, period, the central government. And so when we talk about some of the challenges that consumers have, even with government services, different departments, different ministries, and obviously every government tries to make that process in a particular department or particular ministry more efficient. I believe, as I'm sure we all can agree, that when it comes to the Bahamian consumer, we must do our endeavor best to engage in necessary reforms in government, in relative ministries, to ensure that the Bahamian people are getting adequate service, We focus so much, because of the importance of tourism in our country, we focus so much on the service that we give the visitor, but we don't focus on the service that we give each other, or the service that, sorry? Right, the public, and the service that we should expect when we pay that dollar, the service we should expect, and the fairness we should expect from retailers and other service providers, and so on, Mr. Deputy. You know, Bahamians, for me, this is very fundamental, and obviously we could have a debate and run long on all aspects and technical aspects of a consumer protection bill. But for me, this is very fundamental in that Bahamians in all aspects expect just to get a fair shake, especially when they are going into their pockets. As difficult as things can be, and as difficult as things are now, Mr. Deputy, where people are counting their pennies. For a number of my constituents in my constituency, you know, every day is a grind. Every day is a grind. And so the luxury of spending loads and loads of money and possibly not allowing yourself to be frustrated by a certain experience as a consumer because you have the time and you have the money to say, you know what, I can deal with that later. For somebody who's less fortunate, they don't have that luxury. And so these type of bills, while it's important for everybody, it's especially important for those persons who don't have the ability to operate on a cycle of influence where they could knock on a door, even at a private establishment where they could knock on the door and say, listen, I had this experience with your business, there's a problem. Not everybody has that ability. And this protection bill, in theory, gives the Bahamian, the consumer, to have some recourse. But I emphasize again, as much as the ability to seek recourse and to get recourse is important, we have to ensure that whether it be the ability to get a refund, to make sure that it's done in an adequate way, to ensure that the arms of the government that's responsible for consumer protection, like the persons who are here today, that they are adequately resourced in every which way, to not play politics with it, but to make sure, because at the end of the day, this is about Bahamian way of life and what Bahamians would be experiencing as they take part in the Bahamian economy, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, you know, I've gone through the bill, and I guess if there's one thing I would just like to point out, because obviously I think we've said in here a number of times that a bill can always be better. We know that a bill can always be better. And so as we move along, Mr. Deputy, and I believe that the member for East Grand Bahama actually talked about some aspect of it in terms of making sure we run parallel with the spirit of the bill, keeping up with the changes in technology and how goods and services are provided through, you know, platforms and otherwise. Because if we don't keep up with that, then the bill is going to fall short and in many cases be obsolete if we don't move along with the technological advances that allows consumers, Bahamian consumers, to do business here in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas or internationally, Mr. Deputy. So that's just one thing in particular that I would wish for us to keep in mind as we try to make these bills better, even in the moment or at another opportunity, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, the good member for South Beach, he talked about the fact that you don't know why we were talking about BPL and potholes and crime. How is that related to the bill? But I think that though he didn't, I think he was being sincere, but I think he would have missed the mark in the fact that consumers are dealing with high electricity costs. I mean, a tremendous burden. Bahamians don't feel as though they're getting proper services from BPL. I'm not talking about the issue that is run rampant in here in Parliament about who's responsible. I'm talking about just even on a normal day, the services that people get from BPL, they feel that it's inadequate, and they don't feel that that they, in some cases, have been properly compensated. I know that the member for South Beach, who I know very well and worked at BEC at the time, or BPL, would have spoken about the avenues that consumers have relative to being compensated for appliances or otherwise that would have been destroyed because of surges and so forth. But I mentioned on Monday when we were debating the resolution that I was in Eleuthera this weekend to attend the funeral in Hatchet Bay, and I mean it was unbelievable how many times the electricity went off in Eleuthera. And that right there is not a political statement, that's a reality of what the people, the residents of Eleuthera, be it PLP or F&M, what they're dealing with on the island of Eleuthera. And even the grocery store owners are complaining because of what it may do or what it has done to some of their products and so forth. And so that is real. This is an important bill. This is a very important bill. But even prior to this bill coming to Parliament, there are things every day that the Bahamian consumer, the Bahamian people are contending with in terms of their expectations, all right? I mean, the biggest aspect, obviously, we're talking about Bahamian people who pay their monies, right? They pay their taxes, and they expect as citizens, right, to get a certain level of service, from governments. And I'm not talking now about a political statement again. I'm talking about governments, period, regardless of Free National Movement or Progressive Liberal Party. Fundamentally, the Bahamian people should expect that the fact that they take monies out of their pocket to pay their taxes, or when you pay to renew your driver's license or whatever government service, they expect government to respond adequately to what their monies have been paid for, whether it be keeping the street lights on, whether it be fixing the roads, even something we take for granted, even on waiting on a line to get some kind of government service, and the way and what that experience is when you walk into a government building, that type of experience, all that connects to how the Bahamian consumer feels, Mr. Deputy. And so for me, again, very important bill, but I think it's so important for us to step back and go to 50,000 feet and to think about all of the ways on a daily basis that the Bahamian consumer, that the Bahamian people are being affected. I talked about on Monday. Oh, sorry. What's that, man? 10?
As much as you want.
10 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah? I can be finished on, man. Huh? I can be finished on. That'll be 30 minutes if I go in 10 minutes? Yeah, I got 10 minutes, man. I ain't promise my colleague. I would say promise my colleague.
No, man.
No, I just joking. I just joking. No, man, I just joking. I just joking, bro. I just joking. You here, so I at least can talk. Because I don't waste your time. Talk. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's good to have you back, Madam Speaker. My good cousin. Plenty, you know. Long Island, Acklands. Miss, Madam Speaker, thank you very much. I was mentioned before I sat, Madam Speaker, talking about this very important idea, not idea, but this very important point of the Bahamian consumer, and while this bill is specific to certain aspects of Bahamian consumers' experience in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, it is a reminder of what they face every day. And I talked about on Monday in that debate the fact that, for example, at road traffic at Fort Charlotte and Carmichael, and how they remain cashless. And the fact that you only can go to the stadium and use legal tender. And I believe, again, that's something that the Bahamian consumer has been talking about. The fact is that legal tender should not be refused in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Legal tender shouldn't be refused. And, sorry? No. What I'm saying, yeah, you can go to the stadium, but even that honorable member, that has some practical disadvantage, because if the only place you could go to the stadium, the only place you could pay cash is to go to the stadium, all right? Now you have an influx of people going to the stadium. That's going to make down there very congested, as it does. So my point is that what is efficient for the Bahamian consumer, is the fact that if you could go to Fort Charlotte, road traffic, and if you want to use cash, use cash. If you want to go to Carmichael, do the same thing, not to limit. I understand what you're saying. There's an option. The point is, I'm saying, is not to limit the Bahamian people, not to limit the Bahamian consumer, and say you have to go to the stadium if you have cash, because there are a lot of people, they're not using debit cards. Now, someone had mentioned, a colleague had mentioned, possibly you could have one of those. If somebody came up with the idea, you could have one of those machines, those card machines. I don't know if it was you, member for Yamakro, but they mentioned that that's maybe a business venture for somebody. But government should be in the business of making things better, easier for the Bahamian consumer, because we know the difficulties in operating a bank account for some, and how the banks don't make it easy with all the fees and so on. For some people, it's not advantageous to have a debit card. Actually, it's a disadvantage to have a debit card. So your ability to go in your pocket and pay cash for a government service, and to me, the principle is the same, for the same reason why you would put a school on Acklands, right? You would put a school on Acklands because we're spread out. And so we are trying to make sure to touch as many Bahamians as we could, and not let some of the convenience of what we feel might be more practical for government. It just may be a management issue. I've heard different things about control, and I accept that if you don't have to give cash, that's more of a control mechanism. But the reality of it is there's ways to manage that. So I just wanted to make that particular point about this cashless society that continues to bear on us, and to keep in mind that we do have a lot of Bahamians who don't have the ability, nor would it be advantageous for them to maintain an account, or for them, quite frankly, to want to utilize government services. They still have the ability to use cash, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, this is a good day in the Parliament. I support this bill. It's a very important bill for the Bahamian people. It's very important for protecting the rights of of Bahamian consumers. I do believe that we have a lot of great companies, great businesses in our country who are great at corporate responsibility, and they help various communities thrive, and they've been staples of the community and so forth. But you do have some bad actors out there who, from time to time, or even consistently, are operating in a way that's an injustice to the Bahamian people. Or we know of the proverbial hurricane time when people want to price gouge and do different things and so forth. And even obviously during the pandemic, we would have seen an uptick in a lot of bad acting, if you will. So this is very, very, very important, Madam Speaker, and no surprise why this is something that can be agreed to by both sides because of what it does for the Bahamian people and allows the Bahamian consumer to be additionally protected in ways that prior to the legislation that they hadn't before. Lastly, before I take my seat, Madam Speaker, this also can be put in the category, I guess you could say, some might say it'll be a stretch, but since I'm at the end, I'll take some liberty. Bahamian consumer. No, I ain't gonna take too much liberty. I saw a letter come out today from the Goldwyn Hotel, telling their staff, their employees, about some of the changes to the parking situation at that hotel. Right? The parking lot at Goodman's Bay, right? You have a problem. Now, we know the persons want to get to work and so forth, but clearly there's going to be an issue out there. In the letter, Goldwyn talked about just discouraging employees for parking on the verge, yes, and that they would have spoken to members of the Royal Bahamas Police Force and trying to help that along. But there's going to be a problem out there, and again, I'm not suggesting that there's one answer, but clearly if you have to get to work, you can find somewhere to park your car because you got to get to work on time. But obviously, Goodman's Bay is a place that Bahamians enjoy in large numbers throughout the day, and actually the parking lot is small compared to the usage. So maybe, I don't know if it's something that we may have to extend to keep in mind. The fact is that you have a big hotel that just came next door, but even on the count of the fact that even as it exists, the parking lot is not enough spaces for even Goodman's Bay. The point is that that's an issue that I hope the government can find some way to alleviate as it relates to Goodman's Bay. Obviously, Goldwyn is going to do what they have to do. And just lastly, connected to that, I didn't get to finish it up during Monday, but this thing about beach access, Madam Deputy, one time ago, you were able to access the beach very readily, and they were marked where you were able to get to the beach. Mom and them would grab your hand, you go to the beach. Now, unfortunately, hotels, foreigners, and some of our own fellow Bahamians are taking some liberties that I feel is unfair and unjust to the Bahamian people who are trying to have legal access to these legal easements to the beach. Now you only can go to a certain place to get to the beach, and they're being very strategic. I talked about how there's an easement to the west of Bahama. They've put up a gate there. I know it to be a legal easement because when I was chairman of the Bahamas Public Parks and Beaches Authority, we tried very hard to find out the legal easements, these legal entryways, and we would have gone down to the Department of Lands and Survey and get a map of where they are. And actually, you would be surprised to know, right? Because we drive by it all the time, and you might see a house with a fence extended that looks like a yard, but really, legally, that's an access that should be there. And only because, I'm here in Parliament and I wouldn't point out a particular place because then it would speak to a particular a Bahamian citizen, I don't want to do that. But I mean, like literally where people have taken the public access, fenced it, and now you can't get access to it. So that should not happen in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I'm not putting it at the feet of the government. I'm saying it is something that we need to do because we are being cornered off in our own country. It's happening in the Family Islands. It's happening everywhere, and we got to do something about it. Whether it be, like I say, to the investor has to know you can't come here and do these things. And to the Bahamian person, I say shame, and they should stop. All right. Thank you, Madam Deputy, and it's my honor to support this bill.
Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many